So far, so good. I think the story so far is about change. And we're going to come back to the idea of change on a pretty regular basis over the course of the day. The reality is, it's a lot easier to talk about what other people have to change than what we have to change. It's really hard to internalize. And the reality is nobody likes change. You know, we learn to survive over time by doing things the way we know how to do them. And the idea that we got it wrong is really difficult to absorb. But again, so grateful for Dr. Ballin for kind of making clear in a way that I never could that this really matters. You know, it's from the executive level, we got to go. So we're going to talk about managing change as we get here, but let's talk about what we need to get right. So I don't apologize for the repetition here. There's only three things that we believe you have to get right to get the trajectory in the right direction. So it's, if you like, it's not complicated, but it's really hard. So let's see how that plays out. So we talked about new hospital performance. Many of you in this room are hospitals that are planning or living with a recently built hospital. Many of you are designers who are designing new hospitals. And the idea that we're investing billions of dollars in new hospitals, and maybe this is Dr. Ballin's reward for her good work being here, is you can learn from our mistakes. So as you move into your big capital infrastructure program in BC, we got a lot of things right, we got a lot of things wrong, and I think the nature of this room is that we want to share. But new hospital performance, the majority, and I mean to be a little bit dramatic here, the majority of new hospitals that are built are not performing according to even close to where their models say or to what a good standard of high performance would be today. A majority are not getting that. So if you're involved with a new hospital at this point in time, it might be risky to assume that, yes, that's the other guys. Yeah, we got this nailed. We got the model right. We've got the PSOS right. We got everything figured out here. It probably is not the case, and there's lessons to be learned from both the success stories to date and the things that haven't gone the way that we hoped that they would. So new hospital performance matters. If from here on in we can get every new hospital and major redevelopment, if we can get those right, then we buy ourselves some breathing space to work on all the other stuff, because we've got to decarbonize everybody else as well. And that is the second issue. We talk about existing hospital transition. Again, we are in the beginning stages of the biggest energy transition in human history. You know, the last one was getting onto fossil fuels. This one is getting off them again. And none of us has a clear picture of how that's going to unfold. There's a huge amount of uncertainty in that transition, but we have to manage accordingly. We do know some of the principles, and we do know some of our exhibitors today. They're in the business of these kind of capital rethinks, the capital projects, the how do we get from steam-centric, fossil fuel-centric current situation to the future electrified, decarbonized situation. What does that look like? And there are thousands of hospitals across North America that need to plan that, but you need to plan it now. So, and the third one is the energy efficiency piece, is running what we've got right. What is it? What do we have to do with our operators, with our service contractors, with our management systems, with our processes to run every hospital we have as efficiently as it can with the technology it has today? If we get those three things right, we did it. So come back a year from now and we got it all right, and we don't have to do this anymore. But I'd say it's not complicated. We know how to do all these things, but it's a lot of work. It involves a lot of parties involved doing things very differently than we've done them before. So if we know how to do it, why aren't we doing it? So we want to be very respectful of what people running facilities in hospitals have gone through over the past 3 or 4 years, and are still recovering from now. The COVID pandemic was devastating in every way you can imagine. So unprecedented changes that you had to soak up and absorb and keep facilities running and adapt to new space allocations and new requirements and new rules on a regular basis, as well as doing the regular job. So we're still in a recovery mode from the COVID pandemic. We have limited budgets. government's not about to pour a lot of money into healthcare or education or anything else. That money just doesn't exist. We've got limited resources. We haven't got time to do what we're doing already. And as has been mentioned already, we've got aging infrastructure. It's not like we're taking really well-run machine and modifying it. We're dealing with the fact we've got steam valves which failed. We've got equipment that's out of date. We know that we're growing. The demand for healthcare services, our population is growing in Canada, which I personally think is a great thing. And the population is already aging, which I'm not so keen on. But you get the idea. This is going to keep adding exponentially to demand on healthcare services. So you've got to absorb that at the same time. We know, as we touched on already, there's resistance to change. Nobody wants to change. Nobody wants to be told they have to change. And especially when you're changing whole processes, interrelationships and interactions between people. So all of these things on top of that, if we could just bother you for a moment, we need to address the climate crisis, which is the biggest change of all. So we don't for a second underestimate the magnitude of the task that we're presenting to you today. We're also saying from the previous piece of today that there is no plan B. We don't have the option of saying, you're kind of busy right now. Yeah, we'll get to it in a couple of years. We're running out of time. 2030 is a key date. It's only about to be 6 years away. And we need to solve these things now. And again, government's not going to do it. It's down to us. We have a committed group of people here figuring out how to make that happen. So that's sort of the background context of a panel discussion. If we're talking about change, and it's not change in a vacuum, it's change in extremely stressful and challenging times for everybody. What are techniques? What has to change? Who has to change? How has it worked in the past? Again, I think I mentioned this morning that when we had the pre-meeting with Craig and Kyle and Mike, Kyle commented on the fact we're learning together. There is no blueprint. This has never been done before. This is the biggest energy transition in human history. It hasn't been done before. We got to kind of work together and figure it out. So managing change in challenging times. I could not ask for three better panelists, from Mike from New York and Craig from Manitoba and Kyle from SickKids here to explore the issues again. What has to change? Who has to change? How do we make that happen? So I think you've seen the bios and the backgrounds of our panelists. And this is the template that we'd like to work across. You're going to see this again in a slightly different form this afternoon around ECDM plans, conservation planning. So the idea of we're not talking about doing this differently. It was not a lighting retrofit. It's not a boiler plant replacement. We're talking about systemic change in the way that internally hospitals work together to get better outcomes, and externally how they engage design teams, service contractors, service providers into an integrated system which right now is entirely fractured and fragmented and does not work together, working towards agreed outcomes. And outcomes, we're going to say every time, is an energy target. Every hospital in this room has an energy target, has a number. You can save $500,000 a year, $25,000 a year, $2 million a year. Everyone has a number. When everybody's focused on that and working towards it, then the process comes together. People start working together in different ways because you're looking to meet that outcome. So we're suggesting that governance really matters. And we heard from Dr. Ballum this morning on your boards of directors matter, your senior management matters, and we've included in their government policy, and really appreciate your advice on how do we take our story to government. They got lots on their minds. Time, resources, and money, organizational alignment. Do we have clear roles, responsibilities? Do we know how to work together? Have we got KPIs that match the fact that we're trying to get to a certain greenhouse gas emissions level? Are we providing the right support to our staff? Do they get the right training? Do they know what to do? Do they know what's expected of them? Do they get the right information on a regular basis? And the fourth kind of block here is knowledge. Like, what are the best practices? What is the right way to program an air handling system, or select a boiler, or all of different things that have to work together to make this turn out right. So do we know, again, I want to keep coming back to service providers, and we're going to have that's part of our discussion after lunch is, what are new, better delivery models for services, whether we've got groups here in the business of building automation, service contracts, boiler service contracts. What do we expect from our service contractors and our consultants and our engineers to help us, to work with us to get better outcome? And have we got in place the continuous learning? And our hope is that greening healthcare can be one forum where we bring experience together. This worked, this didn't work. How can we learn from each other? So that with that context, Kyle, I want to start with you, and if I may, I'll play back to you your first thoughts when we talked about this in our preparatory meeting. You were picking on accountability, on learning together, that we're all figuring this out as we go along, and decision making, in particular, avoiding making bad decisions. So if you were to look at this map and say, to get to the happy end state where Project Horizon, your new facility, is going to turn out to be right at the top of that benchmark chart, and your existing facilities are going to be working their way up there, where do you see the one or two biggest areas of leverage? Where are the biggest opportunities? What are the change that you'd like to see?
Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. I think it goes back to doing it together. It's that connection point. It's funny, it's two things I'm going to say before I get deeper into this holistically. The first one is kind of looking at the healthcare sector and kind of going back to the saying that doctors make the worst patients. And you really think about healthcare sector, right? Here we have this massive problem and we know about it,
Yep.
But we're having a challenge at fixing it, right? So we're the doctor here and we're being the worst patients to try to solve our own problems. With that too, the one thing we also know now in this day and age is that as a patient, and someone seeking care, the more you know, the more you can engage that healthcare provider, the better care you get, right? That's what happens at the end of the day. Those who stay quiet, you kind of get a prescription, you get shooed away. The more you're engaged, the more you have the conversation, the better care you get. And so it's bringing that same philosophy when we're really looking at Project Horizon and our team saying, hey, listen, we have to be engaged ourselves throughout the whole process, looking at the design of the building and why the building is being designed, the upgrades that we're making, understanding that we're here from the standpoint of providing the best space for the healthcare providers, the clinicians, but knowing what they have to do in order to have that conversation. What it's allowed me to then also do is carry the conversation beyond just those who we're building the space for, making sure that connects to my CFO and where the money's coming from, right? And their pinch points. And also coming back, and once I understand their business, it's easy for me to talk about my side of the business, the facility side, and the impact from that standpoint. And people might go, well, why is that important? Well, once again, making the hardest decisions out there is being able to understand the language of that individual and what they think is going to be successful for them and their department and overall to help the hospital. But also when we looked at ESG right now, that's the big buzzword and how that impacts the organization. We went for a debenture to help pay for one of our newest buildings that just opened up. And the strategy from there was looking at potentially getting a green bond and going from a green bond. I wouldn't have been able to be part of that conversation, have that conversation with the CFO, and then ultimately the board to see what direction we're going to have, unless I knew that side of the business. And once I understood that side of the business, I was able to talk to them. They started saying my side of the business, from a facility standpoint. So that engagement was the biggest part that's helping us move forward. Now, are there gaps? Yeah, and I think we'll talk more about that. But that's the biggest thing for me right now is really engaging everybody from the clinicians to the financial people, and of course, right to the board right now. And then, of course, Dr. Cohen, our CEO, has been ultimately engaged right from the beginning, understanding the reason why, at least for SickKids, we're here to provide the best care for kids. But I'll go back to say it again, there's no sense of us patching up these kids and putting them back in an environment that we're polluting. So that's the one thing I do look at.
So let me pick up that around the governance piece. I mean, we heard Dr. Cohen last year, and would you say through all of this that Let's leave the government policy on one side for a moment because we want to talk some more about that. And again, how to approach government for me is critically important. They want to do the right thing. We got to help them. But you have all the board executive commitment to do everything that you plan to do, and the clear goals and accountability. Are those in place?
That's where we're moving forward right now. Yes.
Okay.
Through the sustainability strategy and also the new roadmap, from a carbon reduction, but we need more from the board. Later, as a meeting last week, it was on our financial and auditing committee, looking at ESG and importance from there. And what came from there was that it shouldn't just belong to that one committee. It should go right to the top of the board level. So the chair of our board heard that, and she's going to review that. And now my push is to make sure that goes from the top of the board right to all the committees. And therefore that engagement and that governance to make sure that we execute, that we have deliverables, and that there's accountability. Because once again, governance means nothing unless there's accountability. So that's a big one. And
that seems to go back to the idea that you've taken the time to learn their language.
You have to.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Craig, let's move on to you if we could. When we so you have responsibility for Manitoba Shared Health and all of these good things happening here with able support from your friend Miles, of course. You're also, if we could, kind of the current president of CHAZ. So you've got these various hats, and we talk about change and change management. When we chatted about this previously, you talked about it's systemic change. Again, it's not changing the way that you procure this or the way that you operate that. It's systemic change about how this all fits together. What are your immediate thoughts? And with that, I'd focus with you on organizational alignment, perhaps, but you pick the piece of the puzzle that makes sense to you.
Yeah, I mean that so wearing my job hat, it is systemic. Here's Manitoba, this vast province in size with the lowest population density in Canada of the provinces. We only serve 1.4 million people, but we have 400 different builds within that province spread throughout urban, rural, remote, and isolated. Like we've got fly-in locations and we've got ice road locations and the like. So trying to deal with that across and be equitable. A lot of our groups that we're serving are Indigenous groups, and equity in healthcare is a huge discussion, particularly within Manitoba. I believe it's across Canada, but I'm going to say understood a lot differently in Manitoba, where we have such a large percentage of Indigenous people and serving in communities. Winnipeg has the largest Indigenous population percentage of any city in North America, and so we're dealing with all of that. And trying to focus on how do we improve healthcare and healthcare delivery, and we've got this large amount of old stock of buildings, and so are approaching this with government. And as of October 3rd, we have a new government, so shift gears, pull it out of whatever gear you were in, and you're neutral for a couple of weeks, and then you're trying to see which gear you're going to go in. And so, we have the opportunity right now to positively influence policy. There's a NDP government coming in as opposed to our conservative government, which was quite a right-leaning conservative government. So we have that opportunity to jump in to policy and influence it well. We've got to position ourselves, and we heard about that in the last session. One of the things I said early on when we met 2 weeks ago was I said we're also we can't be doing the flash in the pan. Okay, what's the latest one we're going to jump on? And we have centralized utility in Manitoba, as many people do, but that's our natural gas procurement and our electrical. Where are they going? Because apparently I had a conversation on Friday that threw one of them way off the roof of the building, and was on the phone with Miles on Saturday because apparently they heard something that they didn't like. And we go, well, where's their alignment to the rest of the goal of government, even though they're a government arm? So that's systemic change. And then the last thing I'll say on this goes kind of to the knowledge side, with the facilities we're dealing with, we have, our largest facility, Health Sciences Center, we have 100 tradespeople and another 20 to 30 people in support. That's 750 beds. We have 14 bed facilities. And then Bob, who still farms part-time, is the maintenance person of that facility. And then somebody comes in and drops some new technology, drops something into the facility. Do we know how to operate and maintain that? Are we even measuring that? And it goes, but are we even tracking what we're doing in these facilities, or have we just left them be because it's a small part to the equation? It's not a small part. Every piece matters. Think globally, act locally. Picking up on that one.
So stay with me for a moment. So in that whole supply chain, then, as you say, you got a change of government, big opportunity. You've got the centralized utility that may not be on the same page. You've got Winnipeg Health Sciences, which is impressive. Walked the tunnels, loved it. All the way down to remote communities where you have to fly in. Can you pick one point in that supply chain right now where you have the biggest leverage, the biggest impact? Is it the government? Is it the government change? Let's get it right with them and then it works its way down? Or is it more in the middle where, how do we get things done? How do we improve?
I think it's in the middle where we come in with our plan, our strategy to deal with existing infrastructure. And yes, the new infrastructure. We're not building a large amount of 300 and 400 bed facilities. We don't have that many 300 and 400 bed facilities. I mean, throughout the province, we're not there in the square footage, again, due to the demographic. So we need to hit in the middle to say, what are we doing with our existing infrastructure? And that strategy of continuing to maintain and replace that infrastructure. What of that? I mean, for the large facilities, we can look to the partners in this room and across the country who are trying to get out of high pressure steam plants and the like. What are we doing in all of the others? In that, focusing on a target that does align with our utility and going to the government and saying, this is the path forward that gets us where we need to be moving. We need to move into this, efficient, decarbonized, and maintainable. And it'll continue to be efficient if it's maintainable by who we have in the market, whether that's our staff or service providers. When you're traveling 7 hours to go to a 24 bed facility, all because an alarm went off, or, flying up to Churchill, Manitoba to spend 2 days on the edge of Hudson's Bay trying to figure out why the HRV froze. It's kind of obvious why it froze. Those are critical. Like, how do we deliver that? How do we solve this so that we continue to have that efficiency that we build in? I think we know, with all of the vendors and all of the engineers, we know how to make efficient systems. I'm really challenged in having come up from the maintenance side going, well, can we maintain it in every situation? Going back to, we got great results in the Women's Hospital at Health Sciences Center because we have a team of people who know it. We have other hospitals that we've benchmarked with you that aren't up there, right? And we've got to find out why.
So let's move on to Mike. And again, so far I've heard an appeal to industry on, we've got remote fly-in sites. We can't afford to travel up there to fix something that went wrong. How do we have systems, equipment that's more dependable? How do we have better communications? We got BAS companies in the room. What does that look like? And again, in the perfect world, by 2030, all of this is taken care of itself, and you're sitting on a beach somewhere, and life is good. And I think, again, I'll just keep coming back to the fact we know how to do these things. It's just we're not getting them done. So, Mike, coming through to you. So Northwell Health, you've got, I think, 20 hospitals in New York and Long Island. So it's a pretty large group. And when I think when we talked, you're a little bit preoccupied in New York City with electrification and the fact we haven't got enough electrical capacity now. How are we going to do this? And I've heard aspirations to run electric cables down the Hudson River from Quebec. And so a lot of conversation we see on the Government of New York website around technology and offshore wind farms and so on. But within this map, where for Northwell Health, for your 20 hospitals, do you see the priority?
I think just to step back a little bit also,
Yep.
I think, and what I'm hearing today is we have goals, we have aspirations. We don't necessarily have a strategy map. And as an engineer, I like to visualize things. And what I see is a scatter diagram. And, how do we take that scatter diagram and align the pieces? Kyle mentioned engagement. There's a lot of disparate pieces that need to connect. And there's a quote that just keeps coming back to me. Kate Chopin, The Awakening. And I think the name The Awakening is important. The beginning of things is necessarily vague, tangled, chaotic, and exceedingly disturbing. And I think we're at that cusp. Ian, you mentioned about the grid about 120 years ago, only 100 miles from here, Niagara, the first effective grid, utility grid. So now we're looking at changing everything again. And I'm seeing a combination of elements, but alignment, not necessarily organizational alignment, but alignment of all these different entities. And I think the best example is I've been involved in a couple of the working groups for Local Law 97. That is the Climate Mobilization Act for New York City. And we define the law. And now I just started with a task group for how do we make it a reality? It's the task force now for mobilization. And meeting was this past Wednesday, and they said, so what are we going to do now? How are we actually going to start doing what we have enshrined now in law? Silence. So they started to ask about case studies and what is working, what we're learning right here, what we're discussing right here. And I think those are the fundamental alignments that need to occur, but we also need to align government. So in New York City, we'll do something and we'll get penalized for operating cogen plants. Yet New York State will incentivize and the federal government will incentivize. So how do we align the different levels of government so that the efficiency is paramount? And then other things will work themselves out. So part of that strategy map is the hierarchy. What are the most important things? What are the strategies we need to identify so that we can proceed more effectively?
So that helps. So just for my comfort, where in the map would that fit? So are you looking at governance or organizational?
It's a combination of the two.
Okay.
And I think it's really organizational alignment of governance.
Okay.
With governance.
That works. Let me kind of throw it out there. And again, we're learning together. This is a broad discussion. I've heard challenges thrown out there to industry on service provision. We've got challenges to hospitals on new facilities. Before I start picking on people, which I will, immediate questions that anybody has to mind. And Heather, could you grab one of the microphones? I think we've got a spare one.
I'm just going to say a lot of this technology already exists.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the application and getting the buy-in to apply it. There's reservations in terms of new technologies out there because it comes down to the operators as well. I've been doing this for the last 20, 30 years. It works. It keeps moving forward. New technologies are being developed, edge computing, cloud services, monitoring. It's there. It just needs to be executed and applied. And there's got to be buy-in to it. That's,
Okay, let's stay on this conversation for a second. So Craig, with your far-flung empire,
I don't disagree. I mean, there's lots of good, solid technology. What we have is that as you get out of and I'll use where I'm from, 1.4 million people in the province, but 800,000 of them are within the perimeter highway around Winnipeg. Then the balance of them next biggest city is 50,000 people. And then we move smaller and smaller and smaller. If we have multiple designs going into our facilities with multiple applications of then different technologies, we don't have the critical mass to support that when 6 hours up the road, somebody decided to do air source heat pumps, and 7 hours up the road, we did ground source heat pumps, and 8 hours up the road, so now our service, we can't effectively service all of these options. So that's where I go, I agree, the technology, the automations, controls, the how to design a good building and a good building envelope, we understand how to do all that. It's not constantly changing it. And I'm also not trying to be the Luddite and say, well, you know what, 40 years ago, we did pneumatic controls, and boy, those things are, we know what they do.
It's still going, yeah.
Yeah. But, how do we choose those and apply them so that either we or the industry can adequately serve us and support us in an efficient manner?
Craig, let's go back to our 5 whys. So there's a problem here that you've got potentially hard to maintain different kinds of equipment and systems in different locations. How did that happen? Like, why did that happen? Is this, and again, this is not going to get posted as a recording. Do you not get the advice you need from consulting engineers? Is it manufacturers? Like who?
I think it's government policy. Right?
Okay.
We can't lock in as a general rule and just say, well, we're sole sourcing to this for a period of time. They want to go open market all the time. And then also a lot of times we have not been a sophisticated client that we can go to our engineering teams that we've selected and say, this is where we want to go. And this type of application, because this is reliable, it's supportable, and you're going to keep going back to that supportable. And it's not because there aren't people in the industry who can't support it. It's, can I get those people to this site to support it? And do we understand this? Can we commission it well? Can then we take that learning and commissioning and get our staff to commit, staff and or vendors to be able to support it on an ongoing, reliable basis and still keep getting that energy performance, that utility performance we're looking for.
So we keep asking why, and this sounds like Manitoba Shared Health could use standards, saying under these circumstances, as you say, it's not a closed shop. We're only going to use XYZ manufacturer. Sorry, XYZ manufacturer, if you're out there. But these are the standards. This is the functionality we need in this kind of situation, a remote community, this kind of situation. Has Manitoba Shared Health looked at those kind of standards?
So we have developed some, and I like to notch it up because to me, standards become very prescriptive. We still want to have innovation. We still want to have things. So we go, it's a guideline, but we got to put boxes on certain parts of the guideline that that we're getting something supportable. Because when you're building a 24-bed hospital where you're renovating it, you literally can get the residential market coming in to try and do that size of facility. And all of a sudden, you don't have the right support.
Remember one of those in Ontario where a motel builder built the local hospital. And needless to say, it had certain deficiencies. Paul, yes, please, Penny.
Hello?
Yes, there you
Yeah, just very, very quickly. I think I really want to sympathize with the issue. I think it's a big issue for particularly Western provinces that have, very remote and numerous small communities. But I think maybe a tiering approach in your plan, right? If you have a plan and you tier it and then create some, options limited, right? For if you're at this tier of a institution or facility, then you got these 1 or 2 options. And that's the kind of way, and most governments will support that, right? And then you can go out and procure based on those options versus wide open. So it comes back to the plan, right? You gotta have a good plan that makes sense, that you can support and enable.
Let me throw it out there again for general questions, because we want to hear from everybody that's,
Yes?
I'm from SickKids. My question to the panel is how we can make some best practice to make a building future ready. So two aspects. One is from technical point. Another one is if in the future building is proposed to different thing, convert building from 100% fresh air to return air, how we can make building flexible for this type of thing in your planning process.
I don't want to put words in your mouth. That sounds a bit like resilience and adaptability. Those are the kind of ideas?
From design perspective.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody?
Yeah, I think that the pandemic taught us a lot in that area. One of the silver linings of the pandemic was adaptability. How quickly did we turn regular patient rooms into negative pressure rooms? But then going beyond that, what's the next hierarchy, next evolution? One of our largest concerns, and Ian alluded to the Champlain-Hudson Power Express, that power cable running 400 miles from Quebec down to Queens. Our biggest problem is those summer afternoon peaks. So how do we become a more grid interactive building so that we can use some of the resources within the building to reduce those loads and allow for a more holistic solution for the grid? So I think those are some of the things that we're starting to evolve with some of the EAS technologies to start looking at that element. How do we become more grid interactive?
I think
Thanks,
it's
Mike.
also sharing failures. I think this goes back to what you're talking as well. We're afraid to fail and be public about it. So when we build these buildings, we put these technologies in, we're afraid to do it because we don't really know if it's going to work. And the consequences of not doing well and failing and spending money, especially in public sector, can be a career limiting move, or can feel like one. Building a massive hospital and not hitting the targets that you say you're going to do. This is why we love the word contracts, because then it's not my neck. Yeah, I got a neck I can go after. Even though deep down sometimes we do wonder, no offense to the ones here do have those contracts probably aren't always in the best interest of public dollars. So I think it's really understanding all of that. Once again, you have to, for facilities people who wear multiple hats, really challenge yourself to kind of sit back and go, wait, I got to apply that to everything that I'm doing in order to build that future-proof hospital, right? To sit back and go, what worked at Humber, but more importantly, what didn't work? Please share that with me. I'll make that commitment right now. Anything you want to know about SickKids, anything that we have created, it's anyone's here. I will send it to you from our sustainability plan, as well as the business case attached to that. Whatever technologies, from retro commissioning, what worked, what hasn't worked, we'll let you know. I mean, I do my best. I talk to my team as well, and they do it to me. They hold me accountable, keep my feet to the fire. To the vendors who are here and the builders out here, the same thing. They know better than us what works and what doesn't work. It's kind of that, are you penalized for things that didn't really work that well, and how are we engaging them to make sure that they're part of that conversation? So that's the most important thing. We talk about efficient buildings. Oh, it's really about inefficiency in people. I'll speak to myself. I'm not that efficient for what I'm doing. And by that, I mean, once again, I look at my leadership, I look at the engagement I do and the talking I'm having. Am I really sitting down saying, hey, why did we go that path, right? There's certain hospitals right now putting some technologies in that I'm kind of like, But I really should be phoning them and saying, tell me how it didn't work or what happened, and I'll support you through that, right? Because I got the same people that have installed these technologies knocking on my door. And I'm wondering, do I let them in the door or do I wait and see, right? But that wait and see is, we're running out of time, right? That's the thing. So to your question, Alan, I think we have to be bold, but we have to understand what hasn't worked in order to really push forward the things that can work, right? So I think that's part of the dialogue as well.
That's actually a really interesting thought. So we talked about resistance to change, fear of failure as kind of the other side of that evil twin, right? It's and there's not too much reward in the public sector for getting it wrong. So if there's not much upside and there's a lot of downside, that's not exactly a fertile place. But again, we're always talking about why. Where do we go from there? Like, how do we create a safe environment where we can try things differently and make things work? Craig, I got a feeling you want to pick up on this around resilience and adaptability, and I'm thinking you probably have in mind some of those remote communities.
Yeah, I'm having that. And the other was, it's that sharing part. And, now I'm going to do the shameless plug. But, that's where groups like Canadian Healthcare Engineering Society and Greening Healthcare Forum, you step in and we've all done presentations before, and we always talk about all the good things that happen in our facility.
Yeah.
But let's get down to it and say, well, you know what? This really didn't go well. We smashed our head into the wall so hard on that. I'm going to, on a nurse call integrated application. Oh my goodness, career limiting move. I figured the summer of 2019, I was on a vacation. That might have just been a permanent vacation. It was not going well. So, and we've done that on the energy side as well. We've done these things. How do we share those? It's these forums, it's these groups that really help us look at it. And I like what Penny said as well. We need to look at our facilities in a tiering fashion. Not every facility is delivering the same service, and it doesn't mean that we're saying that patient, that service isn't valuable. We're looking at the resiliency and saying, if that service, which I need in that community or in that area to provide appropriate care, equitable care, if it goes down because I lose a service or because I lose equipment, that's all right. Our business continuity plan has figured that out, that we can pick that up and we can move it during the wildfires, during high water season, during things. Now, we're not moving out of most Northwell Health facilities, SickKids, or the Health Sciences Center in Winnipeg, and a lot of the other large urban facilities. We can't just swing in and go, oh, well, no problem, 300 people won't have heat for a few weeks. We'll find them somewhere to go. So that's the other part of our own planning, and I think it goes across all four spectrums there, is to say, we need to have that plan in the business continuity side of our healthcare delivery. Do we know what happens when this happens? If our cogen plant fails in this facility, what's the backup and how long can we operate at a degraded state? And we could talk for hours on this, but got Penny going there.
If you're okay. Maybe.
Please, yes.
Hello. I want to go back to the issue of fear of failure and how hard that is in the public sector. And it is, like, I can tell you, having worked in government, it's brutal. But I think that we work in an industry that is actually expert at that on the clinical side, because failure happens every day in clinical care, and you read about it in the newspaper and everything, and that's what we call issue management, right? And the thing that I think is what I encourage my organization is, governments do realize that you can fail. Auditors general, who are always exposing failures, they understand that. But if you actually have documentation that you did your best and you trained your people, and you picked it up when it wasn't working, and you trained them again, or you got help in and you did this and that, like, I actually think that doesn't become a very interesting story. And where they catch us is where we're like, oh, I had no idea. And that's the first thing, somebody says, I didn't know our system wasn't working. So then you're dead. And if you said, well, yeah, we've known this for 6 months, but we didn't do anything, then you're dead too. So I do think that, when you work in the public sector, you really have to learn the due diligence of actually, being on top of it. And when it does come up, whether you knew it, before or not, that you actually have a really clear action plan and you put it in play. And that really mitigates that risk, because I see so much lack of, appropriate functioning in the public sector because people are just afraid. And it's in government as well. So it is something that we need to think about. And what is your business continuity plan, right? When something's not working.
I fully agree. I think with that too, though, is choosing the world that we're in regards to facilities. there's no really reward. Let's be honest, right? Think about it right now. The lights are on. Really, that's a great accomplishment. There's power to this building right now. What it takes to bring power to this building, but yet there's no ticker tape parades, nothing, right? But when that power goes out, we all know what happens, right? There's no running water, we know what happens, right? But a day in, day out, those facilities that we run takes a lot of energy and great people to do that. And think about with this carbon reduction, decarbonizing, there will be no ticker tape parade for us as facilities people, as designers, engineers, et cetera, when we reduce that, right? This is something we chose to do and we gotta move it forward. And so I think it's that lens of kind of saying, okay, we know ultimately we are accountable. It's getting to that table. I always kind of say, once again, to me, it is people, right? You have to get to the table, find some way to make sure your voice is heard, bring forward. I heard some individual earlier this morning actually that question kind of saying, hey, and no disrespect to the clinical side, right? But a lot of times it takes a leader that's an academic. It takes a leader that's the physician in order to be heard. And that's one thing I've been allowed, at least my organization, to kind of say, they need to be there as they're seeing the most ultimate people in regards to the sector we're in, but the facility people know what's really happening, and we need to be at that table. But you brought up something that I totally believe in earlier, is that this to me is a joint venture, right? That roadmap, we all have our own roadmaps for our own hospitals, and hopefully a lot of people are on that journey. But we need that ultimate roadmap to kind of say, this is what we're going to deliver as public sector hospitals, right? For that industry, for that ministry, for the local government, for the provincial government, and for the federal government. And I definitely challenge those guys here. And you brought up Cascades, and we work with Cascades, but there's Cascades, there's Peach. And if you're here right now, I definitely challenge you to join together. I've been lucky that I've been in connection with multiple groups, not just here in Canada, but across the world right now. And it's interesting. Everyone's working on the same thing, right? And I kind of look at these glasses of bottles and water, but we're all separated. We all know that there's one problem, but we're not working together to solve that problem, right? It's interesting for me, that standpoint. Everybody's trying to create their own policy, try to have their own group, and seem to have the same love and passion and understand the same urgency, but we are not working together. And that's where I brought back the being efficient as people, right? We're all trying to take on one challenge. We know we get it wrong, we are all impacted. We're seeing it right now, but I do say we have to challenge ourselves. Why aren't we working together? Like, that's the one thing that's not talked about, right? It's just, one hospital is really amazing and I want to go after the Humber because competitiveness is great, but why aren't we working together? I look at our vendors. Why aren't we working together? Why aren't they connecting together as joint ventures? We got a strategy for you guys to help you decarbonize. We've come together, 3 of us come together. Here's the strategy. We're going to help work with you to push the governments. Hey, we're going to partner up with Cascades, Peach, and whoever else is out there. Hey, Deloitte, stop working on your own thing. These guys that already have the best framework. Use your resources to help get this KPMG come over from a financial standpoint. You've already worked with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education, right? Because right now universities are doing the same things that we're doing. So I'm kind of going, how do we connect together? I mean, that's the question for the people out there, because you never give knowledge, right? There's so much knowledge, right? But I'm just a person talking on this microphone. I mean, there's knowledge out there. So that's my question to the people listening here. How do we stop being isolated in these silos and come together? Because as your presentation said, time's running out. And I hate to sit there and realize when the bell rings that, wow, it was us that were the roadblock. Not the technology, not the knowledge, not the governance, not the money and the resources, just people got in the way.
I want to pick up on the idea of fear of failure, and there's not much upside, and recognition. And Grace, I'm going to pull you into the conversation here, if I may. So if somebody could move a microphone in that direction. So Greening Healthcare has a theory that recognition matters, and I spend a fair amount of my time traveling out to hospitals and meeting with executives and operators, folks who've never talked to each other in their lives, but celebrating the fact that you've just pulled off a 23% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions over 3 days, and seeing the pride in the operators' eyes and giving the executives a chance to express their appreciation. And it's almost like sustainability becomes that common language. I love your earlier comment. We got to learn to talk each other's languages, and we don't right now. Yeah, if I'm talking to an energy modeler, I have in mind benchmarks, they have in mind model, you know, they butt heads. But so this idea of speaking the language, Grace, I'm wondering, in terms of the upside of doing what you do, Humber River's probably received more recognition than any hospital, maybe anywhere in the world, I don't know, and we've done a lot of that promotion. What has that meant to your organization? Like, and we know Bob Collins, your CEO, is directly involved and so on, but how has that helped? How has that benefited? Do the board know what's going on? Like, how does that work in your world?
Sorry, the question is,
Recognition, does it matter? Like, who knows? How does it bring people together? Like, has the success and the celebration of what Humber River has accomplished, has that been beneficial to the hospital?
Yes, it has been, and it brings the awareness to the whole organization. You know, our performance also, it's part of the reason why we also have a green team established to have a more systematic efforts as an organization to keep improve our performance.
That's helpful. And the benefit of that, as you say, you've got a green team. You'd say generally the community at Humber River is aware of how well they've done or not?
Yes, you know, our hospital has been, you know, aware of the recognition we received in terms of energy performance. But, you know, that's also helped to bring the awareness of sustainability in other areas in the hospital as well. And the recognition is also, you know, again, a driver for us to think, how do we continue to improve? What else can we do?
So you have that visibility.
Yeah.
Perfect. Andrew Blair, today, I don't know how much of the day we've got you. Like, you've been involved with so many new builds, Mount Sinai, kind of like Phoenix from the ashes, kind of rising up from University Avenue. Everything you've heard so far, if you were to think about what has been the biggest single factor that's helped you succeed and got in the way when you haven't succeeded as well, where is the biggest influence? Where's the leverage point? What have you found to be most important to get this right?
Well, it's definitely the people. It's definitely recognition. You definitely can't get your senior leaders to focus and hone in without promoting the great work you're doing right down to the frontline staff that's doing that work. If they buy in and mid-management buys in, and then you start to receive, you know, rewards for the work you're doing via incentives, via, you know, savings, the senior leaders then can translate that and make that into something that they can continue to sell right up to the board level. And so that then in turn creates more opportunities, because once you get a momentum going, they want to see more happen. They want more to be created. And if you're really, really lucky, you start to get them to lock that into the leadership plans over a strat plan for 5 years. And that's when you really have an opportunity. As soon as it's in your strat plan, they've got to act, because the board wants to see results from that strategy plan. And then you have this great gold mine of an opportunity to do better. So it starts with those frontline workers. They've got to really get bought in. The mid-managers got to really sell what those technologies can do, get them supported in training, get them the right tools. I hear, you know, the services, make sure that you have those service contracts so that you can support those technologies. Because if you miss on one of those pieces, as Kyle and some of the others said, the failure hits and then everybody goes back into their shell, doesn't want to do anything. So you got to continue to support those teams through the journey, because it is a journey. It never ends. It's constant, like a marathon.
And so once again, it sounds like you've raised the visibility, the conversations happen, not just in the boiler room, but within the organization. It's to the attention of the board. They have an interest in what's happening. They appreciate the recognition. This stuff works. The other fascinating idea you picked up, Carl, was the idea of joint ventures, that it takes more than one capability. I'm going to pick on your comments, so just so you got a heads up. It takes more than one capability coming together. So we got a building automation service provider, and we've got a boiler service provider, and we've got a mechanical designer, we've got a testing contractor, we've got all those things there. And this is pure blue sky, Colin, you're not committing to anything, but do you see, like you've had to bring joint ventures together with building new hospitals, do you see the opportunity to do that with this massive challenge of decarbonizing thousands of existing hospitals?
Yeah, I think so. I think, so I'm with Ellis Facility Services. We run public-private partnership hospitals. So obviously our hospitals, we do a lot of work in to try and reduce energy and now decarbonization. I think there's a ton of opportunity for industry leaders to share information across. The joint venture is a great idea. I think, we talked about public sector showing or exposing failures, and there's not much. Private sector, you don't want to show a failure. Getting up at a conference and saying, by the way, we failed. So in that long list of hospitals that Ian put up, some of our hospitals are down in the lower ranks, and that's a goal for us, like to bring that up. And we're open to share like what didn't work. And I think that as we build this, we're looking for partners in the private sector that are willing to share and take risks on things, try different things. We have the ability in the public-private partnership to experiment, and we can fail a couple of times because we do have ring-fence maintenance, and we have trained operators and technical people that can help. So yeah, I think that's the only way we're going to get there. Share failures, share successes, share across joint ventures and multiple groups.
And innovate. This is almost like a preview of this afternoon session, but innovate in terms of the service delivery models. How do we get together to provide hospitals what they need to get to the finishing line in terms of being decarbonized? And it's not just one company.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're going to talk about delivery models and how do you not box things in. I mean, I think to your Manitoba example of, being prescriptive without being super prescriptive. You want to have innovation. You don't want to box people in and say, well, this is what you need to do, because now you just start talking about contract and everyone goes into their closet and doesn't innovate.
Janet, if I may, I want to talk about procurement. I want to pick it up here because it's a big deal, and we rely on you as good practice around procurement. As you hear all of this, what red flags are coming up in your mind as to that's all well and good, but that's not the way the game gets played? What are the big issues around procurement that will get in the way of doing things differently?
I think for me, it's the education of the procurement people. I don't think we're that far along yet, which is very, very disappointing in that this is nothing new. This is how we're doing it, and with outcome-based procurements, and how we're developing these models and these performance contracts. These aren't new. Infrastructure Ontario has been doing it for quite some time. The trouble with it is it hasn't transferred into the service, the shared service organizations that are managing a lot of these procurements, because we have to use them as hospitals. So I know from our perspective, it was a struggle using those organizations because they just don't have the knowledge base to run and understand how these procurements happen and really how important and positive they are. The other education that has to get out, unfortunately, is to the service providers themselves. The more that they contribute and participate in these types of outcome procurements, the better they get at responding.
Yep.
I think a lot of times they're caught, they don't understand what they're to do, or how they're to manage it, or how they're to walk through it. And when they get into the middle of it, a light bulb goes off, and it's like, oh my God, we get to sit across the table from these people and have a conversation about what they need. this is what should be happening. It shouldn't be done on a piece of paper. So I think if we can really push the envelope with these procurement entities and get the education out there as to how to do these procurements, we'll be way farther along. I just don't, I'm discouraged that it hasn't happened by now, because we've had the education, they just don't seem to be picking it up.
Yeah, good. Could you pass the microphone?
I would say one of the challenges in existing healthcare going in, because I've worked on both sides, and the challenge in existing healthcare is the procurement process for trying to decarbonize healthcare facilities, is not easy, and it's very new. So we've seen a couple of RFPs that have come out in the last few months, and while there was a lot of appetite from people in this room, partners, the private sector to respond to those RFPs, the challenge was the right information wasn't being made available. So not enough, drawings, for instance, about what's going on, utility data being provided.
Sorry, this is an existing facility.
This is existing facilities.
Okay.
Just like,
Yeah.
we talk about new construction, it's easier to put those things in place and get them right. And I do a lot of that, but the real challenge is go and replace a boiler plant, a steam boiler plant, or try to decarbonize a large 1 million square foot hospital. And they ask you to do that and ask for performance guarantees, but then there's not enough information provided or not enough time to actually be able to put a response in, and not enough time to provide it to actually produce something that lowers the risk for all the parties bidding, right? So one thing that happens is through the procurement process, hospitals are risk averse, so they're trying to put the risk onto the provider, but what they don't understand is that risk then gets priced in, and then you probably can't have a project that goes ahead.
Right.
And so it's trying to make sure that they do feasibility studies in advance, pull that information together, and the goal of the feasibility study should be put out a good procurement package, right? To put together a procurement package that gives vendors an opportunity to bid on it. And that's the training that's needed. And yes, definitely all these procurement providers that the hospitals are required to use, their PMs need a lot of education in that, because in many cases, they get hung up on price and price only versus looking at giving points and scoring for technical submission. So on large projects, they want to do that, but on smaller projects, we have vendors of record, let's say 5 vendors of record, they're like, it's got to be price only. Well, it's not apples to apples, right? And that's the other challenge that we see responding to the marketplace with many of, our, what I'd call team members here, working together to try to provide those services.
That's helpful. And the idea of smaller facilities is interesting, isn't it? Because one of the government's favorite words now is the A words, right? Accelerator, but aggregator is how can we bring that together? And, as always, we're going to run out of time with this, but love to take the procurement question to the panelists. And Carl, you've got some pretty big procurements coming up. Where do you see the opportunities and the barriers with respect to procurement?
I think I'll start with the barriers first, and you're 100% right. And it goes back to, once again, 2 different languages we're talking, trying to get the same thing. The procurement team's trying to get some type of deliverable. The user group, meaning the facilities team, the project teams, trying to make sure that they meet the specifications, and also, of course, price at the end of the day. And the lack of information. I mean, that's public sector. From my life in higher education to healthcare, drawings do not exist, the funding was never there, the utility data isn't there, all those things. So basically, now give me the best price possible, and also make sure you hit it. It is that educational aspect. What I would say back to those who are service providers is almost like those white papers we almost need. If you plan on going on this journey, right, this is what you need. I think that's the investment I would say to the private sector that I don't see a lot, right? I'm a capitalist. I'm not going. I believe everyone's got the right to profit. Just being a custodian of public dollars, I minimize how much you get to profit. That's my job, as I see when I sit in the chair. But the reality is that, bring that knowledge, because those working in healthcare, we got day jobs. So if we know that ahead of time, we can plan, because that's what a lot of issues are, a lack of planning. For the supply chain thing, I agree with you. That the biggest one too is when we have to go for larger ones and we have to use those services, they aren't ready or contracts already locked in, right? So therefore, they've already signed that contract. So to put a sustainability component into there, it's not possible. So we have to get them to do for the next time they renew that 5-year or 3+1+1, whatever it may be. The last thing which I connect to, and I'm open to leaders here, just doubling back, because I think this will help with the supply chain. And I'll go to Andrew and Cliff Harvey. Sorry, Cliff, because I see your leaders. Because I go back to people, and when I say that is that, and maybe you guys can answer this, if there was percentages for sustainability in people's performance plans, would that change things? Because one thing we're looking at already when we're talking supply chain, we're putting that into our suppliers. So we go for RFP, it's 5%, 10%, 20%. So the points matter, right, from a supply chain when you go out there.
Yep.
But I wonder if the same thing went to performance reviews. Let's start there to change people's behaviors, right? To change how we look at that. So now I'm that physician, I want that new MRI. I got to realize I also have skin in the game. When I want the fanciest thing from Siemens, is it going to do? So I guess, Andrew, as a senior leader, is that possible? I know you're not HR, but to you and Cliff, who are senior leaders, how do we get that into the same way we're trying to work it into the supply chain aspect?
So let's leave that as an open question if we could right now. Craig, as we talk about procurement, again, your world is so different. What comes to mind?
Yeah, no, exactly what was said on these procurement sides. I've always said, people come to the door, I want to do a project. Good, I can give you one to fail you, right? I mean, and we in healthcare, we don't have all of that information. We need to be better, and because we want to set this up for success and for a long success. So not just putting out a vague statement of, I need somebody to take this project on and achieve this outcome. Let's spend the time on the front end, develop a relationship. And I really think we need those as owners, relationships with our providers, with our engineering teams, who are going to walk with us, not through to the end of the design, not through the end of construction, but to the end of the life of the product. And that, it goes back to, because I talk on the rural, remote, and isolated, because I do need you to go up there on Christmas Eve and get the air handling unit back up and running because somebody needs to service it. Well, that didn't start because I'm willing to pay a high amount of overtime. It started because at the very beginning, we talked about a solid relationship. What are the outcomes? What are the needs for this facility? Maybe it doesn't need to be open on Christmas Eve and we can do something else. But, just articulating that. And my last comment I want to make on the awareness side, I think is so important that our awareness includes that education component to the people within our facilities. They bring a ton to the table, especially the new staff, and Miles and I participated in some Cascade stuff this summer, and just, to see that good push of healthcare saying, hey, we want better. As we bring everybody in our, thousands of people in our organization, we need to educate back to them through our awareness, telling them the good things, but telling them a few technical things along the way as well. We talk about the anesthetic gases and the fact that a lot of this, is getting leaked away. And it's not just the anesthetic gases, the vacuum systems, the air compressors. What an inefficient way to use electricity. And we're not doing some basics like servicing outlets. And so my 30% efficient air compressor is running an extra 50% of the time to do leaks. Why? Because we're not working with respiratory therapists and with clinical staff to say that little flow meter, you're just supposed to turn the knob, and the ball's not supposed to be always suspended. You're supposed to close it off.
Mike, you're from the land of the free and the home of the brave, so clearly procurement's not an issue down there, right? It's free for all.
No, but in listening though, I'm thinking sometimes, and it's mixed success, zero-based budgeting and trying to work with contractors, open book, through the due diligence process. And I guess just one last thing, as we're speaking, Penny started off with connect the dots, looking up at the fixtures. And so many pieces that we've spoken about are just disconnected dots. How do we connect the dots?
That's a great question. Let me put it back to the floor one more time. There's, and I'll try my very best to kind of summarize how we might go forward from this. Again, our interest from this is to assemble this into a bit of a white paper on practical pathways forward to solve the problem that we all have and none of us has a solution to right now. So I'll come back to that in a moment. But any final thoughts? This is your chance to get it out before lunch, and every idea is a good one right now.
Check.
As a building operator, we know how to run the buildings efficiently with VFDs, with all the technology of reheats, but we don't have the options of alternate fuels and alternate options. You look across the pond and you see Japan's running boilers off hydrogen. They're running generators off hydrogen. As hospitals, we need alternate options. We need redundancy. We don't have those options. Our redundancy is the dirty burning diesel fuel that we have out back. Where's the investment from government and energy investments into hydrogen and alternate options for us moving forward? Does it come down to the case of build it and they will come, or where do we stand at that with new infrastructure?
I think it's a great question, and it's very timely because, as I say, we're trying to figure out what we want to say to government. I know, Paul, you had your hand up, and it sounds like, have you two been working together on this? There's a kind of a natural segue coming here. Paul, do you want to have the last thoughts in terms of this contribution? Again, I'll do my humble best to summarize.
I was reluctant to note this because I keep reflecting on when we first got together, and Ian comes to me and he says, hey, we're doing this greening healthcare thing, and I think we're going to get rid of boilers altogether. So it's a boiler company. You want to get involved? Well, okay, yeah, I got a different opinion than you on that, and I think we should definitely be involved. But as I hear all this today, and I hear about all the challenges, whether it's remote work or education or bridging that gap, it's actually the big bad wolf in the room who in some ways is ahead, and it's oil and gas and process safety management and the way in which oil and gas trains baseline health and safety into something as simple as keeping the lights on every day, right? Like there's no awards for keeping the lights on, yet every day is a win if no one got hurt. And so there are prescriptive measures that can be adopted from oil and gas and from process safety management that you can take today. The Ontario government is doing that with TSSA and the Operating Engineers Act. And that stuff like that, I think, might be hiding right in front of us as we're trying to eliminate oil and gas and boilers. Some of those places are actually the lowest hanging fruit to adopt easy legislation, documentation, and technology. And again, Craig, to your challenge, oil and gas is operating in some of the most remote locations. They can't have downtime, people can't get hurt, and they have to educate their employees. And so they have built process into that is adoptable. And I think we should really have a strong look at that. And if you're working with groups and you're trying to figure out who's going to be your teammate for a procurement, looking at groups like Kurt's firm that are operating in different sectors, I think is very important, right? Because they're going to have insight into the way other sectors are operating. And those coded options, I think, are going to be huge in speeding up this process. So I don't know if that's what you wanted me to say.
That's super helpful. And making the connection between the last two questions is there is a huge amount of work going on in the boiler industry around hydrogen, renewable natural gas, all of those options. And I say sometimes when we feel slightly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the task, which is kind of getting this right, the reality that there's smart people working all over the world on these kind of things, and sooner rather than later, it's all going to come together. And they're all part of the solution. Our view is there are no bad actors here. We're all in the same mess together, and everybody needs to be in the tent. And the boiler industry, I was proud in January to go down with Paul to California and talk to the American Boiler Manufacturers Association and talk about what does the next 10 years look like for you guys. And it's self-evident. You've got thousands of boiler plants across North America. Make them as efficient as you can. Make a business out of that. Squeeze every last bit of efficiency out of every boiler plant. Nothing left that. Well-received, optimistic, enthusiastic. Around we go. We're a little over time, but let me just try to pull some of these pieces together because I've heard challenges to everybody in this room coming out of the conversations that have gone through today. From Penny, I'm going to stay with this one, the triple word score, I love that. The idea of making a massive difference, not incremental difference. So if we're going to make incremental difference, we better do it 1,000 times because we haven't got time to do them one at a time. You know, we got to work our way through that. We heard the idea of joint ventures and the willingness to experiment with process more than with technology. Like, how do we weave things together? So arguably the P3 contract is a process. And it actually works reasonably well. It's never perfect. It's got lots of room to improve, but it's a pretty good model for the rest of the world. So the idea of joint ventures, so look around the room and see if there's anybody you like. And if you're in industry right now, what could you add on to your service offering right now that would help hospitals move towards their energy targets? Because when we chat with Paul, thermogenics can only do the boiler plant. Who do you need to join with to say, I want somebody working at the systems end of things to say they're reducing the demand and we're making sure that we meet that demand as efficiently as we can. One trivial example maybe doesn't make any sense, but who could you be working with in this room or elsewhere to provide the assurance to hospitals in scale to make a massive difference that we can start working our way through hospital after hospital after hospital and get it right? I've heard the idea of longer term relationships, which we completely relate to. You don't make a hospital energy efficient with one project or in 1 year. So the idea of longer term relationships, what do they look like? How do you procure them? Is this a relationship for life? In which case, how do you manage that? How do you adapt to the fact that over the next 10 years, there'll be more change than in the past 30? You know, so what does that look like? So the challenge to industry is working on these things. What can you bring together? What can you do that will be a triple word score that will make a massive difference? And let's start talking about those things. From the hospital standpoint, is listening, looking out for those things, asking for them, talking to your service providers, thinking longer term relationships, really pressing them to say, I need help here. I'm trying to run a hospital. I'm also trying to tackle climate change. I need performance outcomes from you folks, not just doing work and I pay you and you move on. You know, how do we work together on these things? I mean, we've heard working together so many times. We've got utility companies in this room. We've got the federal government in this room. What does working together look like? What's that kind of delivery model? And we're going to get into that after lunch. So I think the last note that I've made here is around planning. You can't wait till the next infrastructure failure or replacement project comes along to think about alternatives. So we're going to talk this afternoon about capital planning. We've got organizations in this room which are expert at longer term planning, but you need a plan in place and a vision of what your low carbon hospital is going to look like in future. You need that plan in place now because when the boiler fails, it's too late. And I don't want to think how many steam plants are being replaced kind of like for like with more efficient equipment, as opposed to 3 years earlier, we started thinking about this and we know where the heat recovery chiller goes in and we know how to put ventilation heat recovery in that will bring the peak load down, that will make it, you know what I mean? You need that conceptual framework in place now so that as those capital decisions come along, you make the right decision, you don't make bad decisions. And again, it goes right back to what our panel said in the first place. So lots of food for thought. It flows into, again, after lunch, it's all about emerging solutions. So this is all about recognizing the challenges that all the hospitals are facing right now everywhere across North America. There's no easy rides at the moment. The challenges you're facing, but the urgency that we need to get on with this, we need to get this right. After lunch, we're going to be talking about emerging solutions for your consideration. And again, our goal is that by the end of the day, everybody leaves here with at least one inspiration to say, man, that's cool. I'm going to try that. I know who I'm going to call tomorrow, and let's get these show on the road. So